If you get aches and pains from knitting, you need to watch this video. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Cletus and I aim to bring you guys informative, fun, and entertaining videos all about knitting. Today's video is super important and often not talked about enough and ignored, and that is pain when we knit. To help me go deeper into this conversation, I have invited board-certified physiotherapist Andrea at ALU Knits to come on and be my very first guest on this channel to talk about aches, pains, what causes them, and how to avoid and relieve the pain you get from knitting. Quick disclaimer that this video does not attempt to diagnose or offer medical attention. Always consult your doctor or physiotherapist when you're attempting any new exercises or stretches. This video is made for entertainment purposes only. Lastly, before we get started, if you find any value in this video at all, please consider liking and sharing this video with your friends. If you want to see more, make sure to click the subscribe button down there and turn on the bell notification so you never miss a video. Now, let's get started. Hello, Andrea. Thank you so much for being here with me today. You are my first ever guest on this channel, and I am so excited to have you here.
I am really honored to be your first guest. Thank you for having me.
Yay! If people don't know from the title or anything, this video is all going to be about a topic that's really important, but often quite overlooked in the knitting and crafting community, and that is kind of like self-care and how to take care of our bodies in the long run. So could you kind of introduce yourself to the audience, kind of talk about like your job, what that means?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Andrea. I'm a physical therapist. I work in the United States. And I work in outpatient orthopedics, so it just means I see people who come in with like any sort of pain in their body, like, you know, neck pain, back pain, injury after a sports injury, and overuse injuries, that kind of thing. So, or people after surgeries, like knee surgeries, shoulder surgeries, that kind of thing. And so I see a lot of people, especially who just have pain because they're just doing things in their everyday life, but maybe something about it isn't quite optimal. And so that's causing their body to kind of break down a little bit under that pressure and create that pain. So I work with people a lot to kind of change maybe either the way they do things. I work with them using different techniques and exercises to build up strength, to kind of get their bodies working back the way they're built to be used.
That is so cool, because I mean, you know this about me, but in case the viewers don't know, I'm a dancer. I do musical theater as my profession pre-COVID days. So I used to see physios like once every 2 weeks or so. So I love physios. They're my savior. They are geniuses in God's sense. So on top of your job as a physiotherapist, you're also a knitter and a crafter. So how long have you been knitting?
I've been knitting, let's see, so I learned in college, but I didn't really knit at all until right after I finished grad school. And I was like kind of in that period of, I took my board exams, I was waiting for the results, and then I was looking for a job too. So I had like about, I think it took like 5 months of that period. And it was like in the middle of winter in Boston, so you couldn't go out and really do anything. And so I picked up the knitting again, and I just kind of like got really into it. I started out knitting socks. Like back in college, I had done scarves, but then I got really into socks for some reason. I just like found them online, was like, oh my God, I really need to learn how to make these. These are fantastic. And so I just knit socks for like 5 months straight. And then ever since then, I just didn't stop. I just kept going. I got into shawls, and then this past year I got into sweaters, ironically, after I moved to hot Texas. But yeah, so I've been knitting for, I think now it's about like 7 years.
I think that's a lot of people can relate to that, where you have like a long bout of time when you're not doing anything, so you decide to pick up knitting. That is literally the case for me. So Andrea, I think first we need to kind of let the audience know what are the potential risks or negative effects of knitting, because I'm sure a lot of people feel it. I feel it. I'm sure you feel it. Sometimes when you're knitting, a few hours just goes by, and then suddenly you try and stand up and everything hurts. But I think a lot of us push that to the back of our mind. So can you kind of take everyone through what could be the potential of negative effects on us?
Yeah, so I think of like 2, maybe 3 categories that are like the biggest risk factors. I say maybe 3 because one of them I'm putting as a third category, but kind of rolls together into the other 2 as well. So one of them is we're really susceptible to overuse injuries. And what that means is just overuse injuries are just injuries where maybe you're doing the same motion over and over again, and doing it over and over again kind of causes your body to break down a little bit. Like think about someone who works in a warehouse and they have to like lift boxes all day long, and they're doing that same exact motion over and over again, and that will lead to pain and breakdown of like kind of, you know, muscle tissue a little bit, just because if you're not doing it the way that's optimal for your body, then it's going to lead to, you know, inflammation and tissue damage and that kind of thing. And so as knitters and crocheters, whatever you're doing with your hands especially, we're really susceptible to that, because, you know, there's really only two basic stitches we do, right? Knit and purl. And most of us do them the exact same way every single time. And so over time, when we're doing that over and over again, you know, we are really susceptible to kind of like wrist and shoulder injuries in that way. The second one is we're also at risk for just kind of this prolonged sitting. I think you mentioned it just now when you said, like, you know, we've been doing it for a while and then we get up after a while and we hurt a lot. So part of that is, you know, when we get really into our craft, you know, we don't get up. We sit maybe for an hour, 2, 3 hours at a time. And like just prolonged sitting in general is not great for our bodies. This is actually something I talk to my patients a lot, because nowadays, you know, most people, you're the exception probably because you're a dancer, but most people sit at their work like all day long. Like they just sit at their computer, they don't get up until lunchtime, and then they sit back down, they don't get up until it's time to go home. And that's really not great. Our bodies are not built to kind of sit in this one posture or to even stand in one posture for a really long time. And we do that over time. Our bodies, our muscles, they get tired, and that leads us to number 3. We end up usually in a really poor posture. So like, you know, for example, if someone's like sitting at their desk all day and they're sitting and they start out like sitting up nice and straight and everything's in good alignment, and then over time, you know, you start to come closer and closer to your computer, you start to lean in more and more. And I think we do that as knitters or crocheters too. For me, I find I do a lot when I'm doing something new. So like right now I'm working on a test knit that uses a, what kind of stitch is it? Oh, I can't remember. It's a honeycomb brioche stitch. That's what it is. It's a honeycomb brioche stitch. And, you know, it's relatively new to me. And so I find that I like end up like this a lot, especially because I'm like trying to make sure I'm picking up the right stitch. I'm doing it the correct way. So, you know, for knitters, I think it's also when we're doing something new to us, a new technique, like, or something where you're not very good at. Like for me, that's also picking up stitches. I absolutely hate picking up stitches. And so for me, that's also a stressful time. Usually after I pick up all my stitches, I'm like, I gotta take a break, because like everything is like super stressed and tense right now. And, you know, I gotta take a step away.
Totally. I think everyone can relate to everything you just said. Like just overuse, doing it for so long because you love it. And then it does suck. I mean, I do love knitting and I'm so glad I found it, but it does really suck that you have to sit down and essentially be like a little couch potato for a few hours a day. And the posture. So I asked the audience, we'll jump into it later, but I asked a lot of my followers on Instagram if they had any questions, and a lot of people are asking about posture and overuse. And it is true. Like you try and look closer, which really hurts the neck. Like in everyday life as well. Like when I'm looking at my phone or if someone's on the computer, I think people are jutting their necks out, but especially for knitting, because you do it for so long. It's just crazy. I know. So it's important. It's really, really important that we take care of ourselves so we can keep knitting for as long as we want. Have you actually had a client or met any patients who had knitting related injuries or like inflammation?
I've had one.
Oh.
And that was, and she was, and so I let's see, when did I see her? I saw her in early 2019. And then like seeing her was kind of what inspired me to start thinking. It was like kind of what started the wheels of what eventually turned into my videos. Because I saw her, she came in, and she was this older lady, and she didn't even tell me, she didn't even realize at first her knitting was why she was having pain. So she came in because she was having neck pain, and it was turning into some numbness kind of down on her hand sometimes. And so, you know, I was working with her on her neck, and I small talk a lot with my patients. I'm a little bit nosy too. And, you know, but we have 45 minutes. Like, what else am I going to talk about if I don't learn about you? And so I think I was working on her, and I was just asking her, oh, you know, like, what do you like to do in your free time? What are you doing when you're not at work? And she's like, oh, I'm a knitter. And I was like, oh, really? Like, you know, that for me, I was like, this is a first. I've never met a patient who was a knitter or like wanted to admit to me they were a knitter. You know, I don't know if it's like this in Hong Kong or wherever your followers are, but at least in the States, like there's this like a little bit of this mindset of like, if you're a knitter, you're like old lady. And I think we're starting to try to change that now, but there is definitely still this old lady kind of stereotype to it. And I was like, oh, interesting. And I asked her, you know, what have you been working on? She said, oh, I've been working on this blanket. She's like, well, you know, it gets kind of heavy. And then I started thinking and I thought, do you have pain when you're knitting? Like, you know, like, do you feel like when you're knitting you have pain? Or like, do you get that numbness in your hands and your arms when you're knitting? And she's like, oh yeah, I do. And I was like, oh, okay. So I asked her, I said, you know, if you want to, could you bring in your project the next time we have a session and let's take a look at how you're knitting, and have you tell me, you know, where do you usually sit when you knit? You know, what kind of posture you're usually in? And it came out that she usually sits in her bed, and she's kind of like, you know, leaned back against her headboard and she's looking down and she's just kind of like this. And that was when I was like, oh, like the way you're sitting and the way your neck is kind of looking down and you got this heavy project that you feel like you have to really pull up, you know, that's like creating so much tension in here. And that's kind of, you know, choking up on your nerves, and your muscles are so tight that they're just clamping down on your nerves and creating that kind of numbness sort of feeling that you have. And that was like really fun, not just because I got to see her knitting, that was really great too, but it was fun to sit there and like talk her through something that, you know, it was something she never thought to bring up. She would never have thought to bring up knitting as something that either is causing her pain or something that she wants to be pain-free. And it was really fun to delve into that kind of like a crafting side of my patient and to work with her, because I know so well how people knit. You know, like to me, you know, I'm a knitter. I kind of know how to crochet, really bad at it. But, you know, I know kind of the inner mechanics of what could cause you pain and what kind of positions could you find yourself in that could create that pain. And it was like really fun to kind of mesh the two together, kind of like my hobby and my career, and like put them together and help someone.
That patient is so lucky to have found you as well, because I'm not sure how many people regularly go to physios or have ever been to a physio. Correct me if I'm wrong. A few physios would specialize in certain areas, right? So in certain sports, or for me, I was always seeing physios who have experience with ballet companies or dance companies and stuff. So, and that was already really rare. That was already really quite difficult for us to find people who kind of understand that, you know, me touching my toes isn't good. It's like, I should be touching like the back wall or something like that as a dancer. So it's so rare to have a physiotherapist who also understands knitting. That is so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's not like I go around asking people if they knit, but I think with all the therapists I work with, I've never met another one that knit or crocheted, at least to the degree that I think most of us do, you know, where it's like something where we feel like we have to do it. And it's like, maybe at most I've met someone who's like, oh, I learned when I was younger, my mom taught me, but like, I haven't done it in years. Yeah, that was like, I think the first time where I was like, oh, like, maybe there's like some way and where these two can come together and it doesn't have to be like completely separate.
Maybe some years down the line, there'll be a separate pathway of physios just for crafting.
Oh, that would be amazing.
There's a market, you can teach it, there's a market for it. So let's kind of talk about, I think the first big thing, and a lot of people asked about this as well, is posture. So first of all, I'm just gonna ask so we all know once and for all, is there a correct and incorrect posture when we're knitting and crafting?
So I have like a yes and no question to this, because I don't like to tell anyone that there's like an absolute one way to do something, because all our bodies are different. I think even you as a dancer, you know that even better than, you know, most people do. All our bodies a little bit different. We handle things differently. We handle stresses differently, but there are, you know, kind of guidelines for what we should follow. So I'll kind of go over those guidelines right now. So I'm going to kind of start from the head. We're going to work our way down the body. So the first one is just with your head and neck, that we want your head and neck to be in alignment with the rest of your body. I'm going to turn to the side a little bit so you can see me illustrate this a little bit better. But, you know, in our ideal posture alignment, you know, head is kind of back a little bit, ears kind of over your shoulders, and chin tucked. What we kind of all end up doing is kind of like this, you know, or with our necks, our chins kind of jutting out like this. So we want to bring everything back and down. And, you know, I think a lot of people ask me, you know, how can I hold my knitting up in a way where I'm not looking down all the way? And I'll say, like, there's a balance to that, because the next part is our shoulders, right? We want our shoulders to be relaxed and down. We don't want them up near our ears. So when you're trying to figure out the balance of where do I hold my knitting so my neck and my shoulders are okay, you know, it's got to be, you got to play around with it. It's going to be different for some people, either closer up or down, or, you know, if you're looking down a little bit, as long as your chin is kind of retracted and tucked down, that's okay, because then you're still keeping your head close to your spine, so that's not all the way out here putting pressure through your neck and your upper back. So shoulders down. Ideally, you know, I like to tell people to try to keep their elbows like tucked down near them a little bit. You know, we don't want them all the way out here, because when you're out here, you're using all these rotator cuff muscles to kind of keep your arms up, and that's just like unnecessary energy. So trying to keep your elbows down by your side, and then, you know, you want to be sitting in a way where your low back is supported. That is where there's variations, because everyone's a little bit different. Some people like to be fully supported sitting in a nice firm chair. Some people like to be kind of like sitting on the ground. Like today, I'm doing this interview on the ground because when I move around a lot, I like to have that floor space a little bit. But even when I'm knitting, anyone who's like seen me on a Zoom knitting thing, they will probably tell you I shift around a lot. And part of that is to combat that sitting in one posture, right? So I will sit, and sometimes like my legs will be kind of up here a little bit, and then 10 minutes later you'll find me over here a little bit, and then, you know, I'll cross my legs, then I'll put them down. The ideal posture for your hips and legs is that, you know, your feet are flat on the ground, your knees are a little bit lower than your hips. So, you know, if you're thinking about your hips and your knees as a 90-degree angle, they kind of look like a chair position like this, instead of like knees all the way up. But I'll tell you, like, there's a lot of variation with that. You know, if you're really comfortable sitting cross-legged, or you're really comfortable with your legs a certain way and you feel okay when you get up, you know, go for it. Good for you. Do what works.
I'm glad to hear that there's a bit of wiggle room in there, and that I don't have to just kind of sit on an upright chair and look really, really proper the whole time, because I know that I should be doing that, but it's difficult. It's difficult to do that sometimes. And I actually posted like a reel a while ago. Like...
I saw that. And I was thinking about that when I was thinking about this question, because I was like, that is perfect. Like, what you're doing is kind of what I would prefer everyone else to do, is to kind of move around as you're knitting. Even if you're knitting for 2 or 3 hours at a time, if you're moving around, that's still better for your body than like sitting in the perfect posture, like still for 2 hours.
Right.
You know?
Right. So kind of changing is a little bit more important than kind of finding the one perfect position and staying still for a few hours. That leads us perfectly to the next topic, which is kind of like timing and rest. So how often should we be taking breaks when we're knitting?
So I am going to kind of apply what I tell my regular patients for how much they sit. Is the ideal, in the ideal world, we would get up every 30 minutes. And move around a little bit. And I tell everyone, you know, just because you're getting up every 30 minutes doesn't mean that you're getting up and you're like moving around for 5 minutes straight, right? It could be getting up for 30 minutes for like 30 seconds. Just like wiggle around a little bit, shake things out, and then sit back down. Part of that is because we have this layer underneath our skin called fascia. It lies over all our muscles. Like if you've ever prepared a raw chicken before, it's like kind of that saran wrap like layer underneath the skin. So we have that coating all our muscles, and fascia has a certain memory to it. And 30 minutes is like right around the time when that fascia starts to be like, ooh, like we've been like this for a while. Like, should we be staying like this? Like maybe this is something we need to memorize. And so if we get up every 30 minutes, that kind of breaks up that pattern, and it allows your body to reset a little bit. But, you know, if you can't do every 30 minutes, then I say like at least once an hour is the bare minimum. Yeah.
That's tough, because literally when you're in the zone for knitting,
yes.
I would just look at my clock and be like, oh, 5 hours has gone by. Oops.
Yeah. I know. I feel that hard too. Like I do all my knitting at night, usually after my kids go to bed. So I will sit there for like 3 hours and like knit until I'm like, you know, I really ought to go to bed. And then my brain's like, no, like this is your me time. Don't go to bed. But that's also why I say then if you're going to sit for a long time and, you know, maybe you get so into the zone you don't get up and move around, if you're at least like shifting around your chair, that's still something at least.
So I think let's move on to some audience/viewer questions. So I posted on my Instagram if anyone had any questions for you, or anyone tell me what really bothers them. And we got tons. The first question, it kind of harkens back to our first, our initial conversation, but this is by Joanna Gotteltier. Oh no, I'm gonna butcher all these names. I'm so sorry in advance. But she asks, can knitting cause long-term damage?
Oh, that's a tricky question, because I feel like there's a lot of factors that go into it. It can definitely contribute to long-term damage. Can it directly cause it? It could, depending on kind of what you're doing. You know, if you're not listening to your body and not listening to when it tells you like this is painful and you got to stop, then I think if you keep ignoring those messages, then yes. but I hesitate to say long-term damage because most things are reversible to a certain degree. Like if they weren't, like I wouldn't have a job. But there are certain things, that aren't reversible. Like sometimes after a certain point, if you really irritate your nerves a lot, you can have some irreversible nerve damage, which looks like, either numbness, tingling, pain, weakness. But those are like really, really severe cases. And I wouldn't say that they happen a lot. Like I wouldn't expect that to come from doing only knitting alone.
The next question. Okay, this is quite specific and I've actually never heard of this before. Beard Cub Knits on Instagram asks, so how to stretch for knitter's elbow, aka tennis elbow? And he says he's an English style knitter. Now, I know what tennis elbow is, but I never knew that people would refer to something as knitter's elbow. So could you kind of talk about that a little
I've
bit?
actually never heard that term either, but it doesn't surprise me. So we're going to do like a quick like anatomy overview a little bit. So you probably already know this, but with tennis elbow, we call it tennis elbow because tennis players get a lot when they're doing their, I don't even know these things, forehand.
Who knows?
So anyway, it's like that flicking motion with your wrist, right? And so, there's golfer's elbow also, which is like the other side, flicking the other side. But, so the muscles that control our wrists in this motion they do actually come up here from your elbow. So they originate from right around your elbow here, and then they come down, and then they control your wrist. So it's sometimes it can be very misleading because people will say like, my elbow hurts, and they'll think something's wrong with their elbow when actually what's going on is something going down at their wrist. And so tennis elbow or knitter's elbow, whatever you have it, is usually overuse injury leading to tendonitis, which just means that the tendons of those muscles are inflamed. And when a tendon's inflamed, it's a little bit stubborn. It takes some time to get that inflammation to go down. And usually we do that by a combination of a little bit of rest, not complete rest, but a little bit of rest, some icing, some hands-on techniques, and some exercises to strengthen. One thing I find works really great for any sort of tendonitis, but especially for, tennis elbow, knitter's elbow, whatever, is if you take your fingers and then you look at where that muscle is. It's kind of right on the side of your elbow here. I'm going to like exaggerate it so you can kind of see it right there. For anyone who's out there who, maybe doesn't have great anatomy skills, just push around until you find something that hurts, something that's like really tender, right? Once you find that tender spot, what you want to do is you want to press down and you draw across it. Press down, draw across, press down, draw across. What we're doing is we're stimulating cell receptors inside the muscle that will send kind of like pain relieving signals throughout. And so that will help decrease that pain, decrease that inflammation a little bit in there as well. So anyone out there, you can give this a try. I would do no more like 5 minutes max, and you'll know you're doing correctly because as you keep doing it, it should feel less sensitive. You should be like, oh, I had to press harder to get it to hurt. If it's like hurting more, then you're probably doing it incorrectly. Yeah. Other than that, it's just a matter of strengthening your wrists, especially as knitters. If you hold your knitting a certain way, I'm thinking if he's saying he's an English knitter, we tend to kind of, I can't mirror it, but we do a lot of like this motion. I'm an English knitter as well. So it could be that there's a lot of this. Maybe your wrist is a little bit, not neutral and straight. Maybe it's a little bit bent a little bit more. And so anytime like a joint is not straight, especially your wrist, right? Our wrists are very mobile. They can go this way, this way, this way, this way. So anytime it's kind of cocked a different way, that's going to put whatever muscle controls that motion on strain, and that muscle is going to be holding it and kind of be like, I'm like working real hard. I'm working this entire time you're knitting. And then at some point it's going to be like, I'm done. Like I'm out. This hurts. I'm telling you. And that's kind of what happens with that. So the other thing I would say is, try to see, maybe set up a camera and set it to watch you knit for 10 minutes and then look at it and kind of try to study it and see like what position is my wrist in, what position is my hand in. Actually this month I'm starting a series of reels on different body parts and kind of positions to avoid. So stay tuned because this will probably address that a little bit as well.
That thing, I was doing it as you were explaining. It feels good.
Yeah. And then you can ice after, when you're done knitting, maybe ice for 10-15 minutes. The other day when I was trying to learn that new stitch, I was working on it real hard for a long time. And then I started getting some kind of forearm tightness. And then everyone's going to laugh at me. But I was like, maybe I should ice. Maybe I should just follow my own advice. And so, I got an ice pack. I stuck it on there and just like watched some YouTube videos. And then at the end, I was like, oh, it is better. I'm glad to know my stuff works.
Oh my, that's genius. I mean, I love that. I mean, I always just think of ice as like injury. Like the second you kind of fall over, you twist an ankle, you get some ice pack on there. It never occurs to me, and I'm sure it doesn't occur to a lot of us to ice after knitting. That's cool. Maybe I'll try that as well. So let's see the next question. Okay, so this is huge, and we did talk about this. Let's see if we can kind of talk more in depth about it. So like Knitted by the Sun, Yishuan, Fifi and Riri, and Panibs, they've all talked about neck pain. Specifically, Panibs said, my neck hurts a lot whenever I'm knitting or crocheting. So I'm assuming that they're susceptible to what we were talking about, kind of jutting our head forward. Is there more tips on kind of like how you can retrain your brain to do that less?
So the retraining is definitely like what we have to do to change any sort of bad habit or posture we're in. And that's the hardest part, is the retraining. And the first step to that retraining is becoming aware of when you're doing it. A lot of times we're not even aware. Like we don't even know what we look like until, you know, it's like far too late. This happens to me all the time. Like Sunday, I think I'll like turn and look in the mirror and I'm like, oh, my shoulder's all the way up there. Like, how did they get up there? Like, go back down. Or I'll see a picture of myself from something and I'm like, oh my goodness, like that is terrible. So the first part is trying to increase our body awareness. And so I released a reel about this, I think like 2 or 3 weeks ago, called Identify Your Pain Generators. But this is kind of talking about that in the sense of that when you start to feel that pain, all of our instinct is to move out, right? Like you feel pain, you're like, oh, like let me get up and like move around. And that's just because that's our body's response. Kind of the same response that we have to like if you touch something burning hot, right? We immediately pull our hand away to protect ourselves. But if we can start to at least train ourselves that when you feel pain, just like stop for a moment and think, okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to do a body scan. As in I'm going to, you know, go head to toe and think, how does my head feel? How does my neck feel? How do my shoulders feel? How does my chest feel? How does my back feel? My legs, my butt? And then kind of catalog that. You will start to figure out kind of what position you're in and what's causing that pain. Because sometimes, you know, you might feel painful and you'll move out of it. And then later you'll be like, I don't even know what was painful. Like, I don't even know what it was. I just felt pain and, you know, it was uncomfortable. And, you know, our memories aren't always that great when it comes to that thing. So it's easier to try to stay in it for, you know, an extra minute and figure that out instead of trying to like think back and try to like observe our past behavior. And I feel like that really helps you take that first step towards you know, retraining your body and your brain. The second part is that anytime you've got pain, there's always usually either a muscle that is weak and also kind of overstrained. And so for our necks, it's going to be the muscles that the main ones are your levator scapula, which attach at the base of your skull and run all the way down to your shoulder blade. So they control like this kind of shrugging motion a little bit. And they also they get tense and overstrained when we're kind of like this as well, or like this, down like this, okay? Because then they're kind of like pulled all the way over. They're trying to hang on for dear life to your head so it doesn't fall off. I'm just kidding, it won't fall off. Believe it or not, I had a patient ask me once if he could rip his head off by doing a neck stretch. The poor guy. I shouldn't laugh at him. So one of the things is we want to release those tight muscles, and then we want to strengthen them as well. We want to strengthen the tight muscles, and we want to strengthen the other muscles. So one of them is an exercise called a chin tuck. So all you're doing is you're retracting your head a little bit and tucking your chin. Try to like making that double chin, that unflattering angle. And all you're going to do is you're going to hold it, count to 10, and then relax. And all that's going to do is just strengthen the muscles deep inside your neck here that kind of help keep your head back in place. These muscles don't really work much anymore in our modern society because we're looking at our cameras for like this all the time. The other thing is to release those muscles. So one of them is a stretch. You can either stretch your head to the side. This will stretch your upper trapezius muscle, which shrugs your shoulders. This one, a lot of people carry a lot of tension and stress in here. I know when I get super stressed, I carry a lot of tension. I have like big, gigantic knots in here. To stretch your levator scapula muscle, you're going to turn your head 45 degrees like you're looking at your elbow, and you're going to pull straight down. I really love the stretch. The stretch is like one of my absolute favorites. I've yet to meet anyone who doesn't like feel a single thing when they do it. Everyone's always like, oh my God, like this one's amazing. I will do this like when I'm driving, like at a stop sign or something, you know, at a red light, I will sit there and I'll stretch a little bit. Or anytime I'm like sitting and knitting and I feel something, you know, I'll stretch for a little bit, just a little bit. The other thing that can be helpful, and this is something that's specific to me, maybe some people might not find it that helpful. Every person's kind of different. You got to play around and figure out what works for you. Is that if I sit and I have a chair that has a back, or if I'm sitting on a couch or something where there's a back, then it reminds me maybe to think, oh, like maybe I think pressing my head back into it a little bit instead of like leaning forward. Think like, oh, maybe, you know, if you relax back into your chair, that'll help bring you in line with the rest of your spine instead of how we most usually sit, kind of like this.
Yeah, I think neck was the most asked about body part, which completely makes sense, and that's genius. I love that stretch as well. I do it all the time. Oh my goodness.
The other part is make sure you have really good lighting. Make sure you have more light than you think you need. You know, sometimes when we're looking really closely, sometimes it's because we actually can't see it that well. Even if you think you've got good lighting, give yourself more lighting and see if that changes anything. And don't knit with black yarn, which is what I'm currently doing, but.
That is so true. I was literally just about to say that. Every time I'm knitting with a darker color, I feel like I'm blind. I can't see anything. It's so annoying. A next kind of subset of people who were asking about body parts specifically was their fingers and finger cramping. So Lewis David, he said, am I on my own when I'm getting little pinky cramps? Any exercises to help? I think maybe we can talk about all the fingers and not just pinky, but that's quite specific.
That is very specific. So the same way that your wrist is controlled by muscles that attach by your elbows, your hands are too. Your hands are controlled by two sets. We have what we call extrinsic muscles, which are muscles where the tendons are down here, control your fingers, but the muscle bellies and the tendons are actually up here in your forearm. And we've got intrinsic muscles, which are tiny little muscles that are all just like right in here between each of your bones. What it sounds like he's talking about is probably an extrinsic muscle. And so if he's getting a lot of pinky cramps, so if you're home, try this with me, but kind of put your hand kind of down here around your forearm here, wiggle your pinky finger and see where you feel a little flicker of movement in your forearm. And that is where that muscle is. So if I'm wiggling my finger, if I'm going back and forth like this, I feel it on both sides. I feel a little bit over here and I feel a little bit back here. If you're just doing one side, you'll feel it kind of more on the inside of your elbow a little bit. If you don't feel it, what you can do is like take your hand against something, press into it with your pinky finger, you'll feel that muscle pop out at you as well, okay? And so once you identify where that muscle is, try pushing into it. See if it hurts. If it hurts, then ta-da, like there it is. And so part of that cramping is also when your muscles are overworked and tired. They're going to cramp up when they're like, you know what, I'm giving out, like I'm done here. And so that's part of it. So part of that is when you start to feel that cramping, I would say stop, put your knitting down, put your crocheting down, do a stretch. And so with our fingers, you know, we don't necessarily go into specific stretches for every single muscle or finger, but a great one I like to do is a wrist stretch where you take your hand, you want to keep your forearm straight because some of these muscles attach up above your elbow. And so if you keep your elbow straight, they will kind of cross, they will also be stretched over. And then you're going to just pull your palm and your fingers back. Okay, if you pull back on your fingers here even more, you'll feel that. If you want, you can try to isolate them. Be careful, don't, you know, hyperextend your fingers or anything. Yeah, and you just do that. Try to hold for 30 seconds if you can, and go from there.
Urban Knit Knots asks, my left shoulder hurts a lot since I started knitting excessively. Any good tips? Now, I've actually never really had shoulder pain. Would you say that's quite common, or?
I think it depends on what kind of posture you find yourself in. Like, I think people are either people who hold their work really tightly in their hands, or they're people who hold everything up here because they're trying to see. So my guess, you know, and it's hard for me to say because I haven't seen him or her knit at all, but my guess is if you're having a lot of shoulder pain when you're knitting, it's probably because you're holding your shoulder up really close to yourself. When maybe you're trying to see that work. Maybe you're trying not to put your head down, and so you're holding up closer, but doing that, you're bringing your shoulders up and bringing everything else up with you. So first thing I would say is, you know, knit, when you start to feel that pain, do what we talked about before. Pause, scan your body, think, you know, where am I feeling it? What posture am I in? Can I relax that? And if I relax it, is that a big difference? Because it is. That's probably what's causing your pain. You know, with knitting, shoulder injuries are a lot of kind of bigger movements. And knitting, you know, we don't use our shoulders a ton. You know, there's not a lot of like rotational motion that goes into knitting with our shoulders at least. So I would guess that's probably why, is that there's a lot of tension there. The tricky thing though too is that any pain that's kind of coming down your shoulder into your arm, elbows, arms, hands, there's always the potential that it's something coming from your neck. And that is something that you need to see a physical therapist or an orthopedist for them to diagnose and to figure out where that pain is coming from. That's not something I would advise trying to figure out on your own. I would definitely go see a specialist for that, especially if you're getting any numbness, tingling, pain, weakness, that kind of thing, okay? So, like anytime you see a good physical therapist, they will always, if you have any sort of pain in your arm or shoulder, they always also consider your neck as well. Because, we could think, if you got pain in your elbow, but it's coming from your neck, we can do all the things to your elbow we can, but it's not going to change a single thing because that pain is coming from your neck. Yeah, so I would say to anyone out there, my reels, I think, personally, are great, but if you feel like you're doing them and it's not changing a single thing for you, even after a few weeks, anything I tell my patients to do, any changes you're making, any stretches or exercises, I always tell them, give it like 2 to 4 weeks before you write it off as something that doesn't work, because our bodies take time to change. Muscles take time to strengthen and to lengthen as well. So give it some time first before you write it off. But if maybe you've been doing the stretches or the exercises for 4 weeks and things are really not changing for your pain, or like heaven forbid they're getting worse, go see a specialist. Go see a physical therapist if you can, if you have direct access in the state, if you're in the United States, or I don't know what the laws are internationally, but go see a physical therapist, go see an orthopedist or something, and have them really take a look at you and make sure that, maybe where you think your pain is coming from is correct, and, get the help that you need.
In the States, is it quite accessible? Because in Hong Kong, sometimes you have to get a referral from a GP first. But in England, you can kind of just like walk anywhere and get it done.
That is the ideal world. The States, it differs state by state, of course. And so it kind of changes. And it depends on your insurance policy too, because I used to practice in Massachusetts where they supposedly had direct access where you could just walk into a PT office and be seen. But most insurances there would require that you have a referral from your GP first. So it's different state by state, and physical therapists are really pushing hard for patients to have direct access because, most of the times we know ourselves. We know that, oh, I've got back pain. You don't necessarily need to go see a doctor, have them tell you, go see physical therapy, you have back pain. Some people do, but some people don't, and now that we have Google, most people are fairly well educated and can figure some of that stuff out for themselves. So I would say, check the laws in your state. At the least, you can call a local physical therapy office and they will tell you, kind of the steps you need to take, whether or not you need a referral or not, and that kind of thing. But I think a lot of people maybe don't know what physical therapy can do for them. A lot of people might think that for pain, you need to go see a doctor who will give you pills, like muscle relaxants, pain relievers, that kind of thing. And I would say sometimes in some cases those are really helpful, but in other cases, try physical therapy first. It might take more work from you. It's not a passive thing. It requires a lot of participation from you and a lot of commitment. But I would say in the long term, it's much more rewarding. You learn about your body. You learn how to prevent your pain from coming back, hopefully, or what to do if it starts to creep back up a little bit so that it doesn't, burst wide open like it did the first time. Whereas, if you just go and pop some pills, you'll never really learn about yourself or figure yourself out.
Cool. So that was our last question from our audience. To round things off, could you please, if you would ever be so sweet to, kind of give me and the audience just a little stretching routine that would kind of be good for just your everyday person, for everyday crafter and knitter?
Yes, I definitely can. So again, I'm going to start from the top of your body and we're going to work our way down. So the first one is just those neck stretches, pick one, or you can do both. You can do your upper trap stretch where you're just pulling your head straight over to the side, or you can do your levator scap stretch where you're pulling down, kind of with your head tucked, looking at your elbow, pulling down. There are those. The next thing, this isn't quite a stretch, but I think it's an important one to do, is that chin tuck. And this one, you can do anytime. I do a lot when I'm driving because I'm like reminded that, oh, my head's kind of forward. I'm a little stressed out driving. So you can do that chin tuck. The second one, it's like a combination stretch and flexibility, is what I call thoracic extensions. So what you'll do is you can roll up a big towel. If you have a foam roller, you can use a foam roller, and you're going to place it so it's right underneath your shoulder blades. And all you're going to do is bend backwards over it. Okay, and that will really kind of stretch out your upper back. You might feel your bones crack a little bit, which can be nice for some people and feel good. The next one is a piriformis stretch for your hips and for your butt and for your low back as well. So all you would do is like sit and just pull your leg over, your foot over on top of your knee, and just pull it close to you, like that. These are all reels I have as well that you can look for different ways to do them. And I would say those are the big ones to kind of do.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for all of that. That was so informative, so useful, and I really hope that kind of helps everyone who watches this either kind of understand more about the role of PTs, or when to go and see PT, or just how to kind of look after themselves and not dismiss their pain, which is so important. Would you like to promote or plug anything? I know you mentioned your reel and your website. I think everyone would love to know more and would love to follow you as well.
So my Instagram is Ayloo Knits. It's AYLOOKNITS. All my reels are in there. I also have a new website that just launched today. It's www.ptandrea.com. So PTANDREA.com. All the videos are there as well. You know, I decided to make it as accessible to everyone as I could because, you know, not all knitters and crocheters are on Instagram. It's also up on YouTube. If you just search for it, I don't know my YouTube link name. It's like a bunch of numbers and letters. Yeah. Yeah. So that's that. If you have more questions, you know, I always say my Instagram DMs are open, or you can email me. My email is on my website. And I will try to get back to you.
Well, thank you so much. Maybe if people love this, leave a like, and then maybe if enough people like it, we can do a part 2 or something.
I would love that.
Thank you all so much for sticking around to the end of this video. It was a long one, but super, super important, and I'm so glad that we had this conversation. Hopefully you all found this video helpful in navigating the aches and pains associated to knitting and crafting. If that's the case, please don't forget to like and share with your friends, subscribe down there, and leave a comment. Click the thumbnail on the screen to see my latest upload, and click my profile picture to subscribe. And I'll see you guys all again soon. Bye!